Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. It's finally been announced. The blood feud, the family vendetta, it will be settled. Conor Benn versus Chris EUBANK Jr. Personally, I cannot wait for this fight. I know that there are a lot of people that seem to be against it. A lot of voices on YouTube, a lot of voices on Twitter, particularly among the boxing hardcore fans, who see this as a big middleweight who's up against an outsized welterweight, and he'll just get obliterated, Conor Benn. I think the history of boxing tells us that this could end up being a fantastic fight, and we will get into that later, and we'll explain exactly why I think we should all get behind it and why I personally am so excited. There's also some footage just emerged of Conor Benn preparing for this fight. He's started camp, he's started training, and perhaps it's revealing a little bit about some of the tactics that he wants to use against Chris EUBANK. So let's start off with that. We'll start off with the tactical approach, and then afterwards we'll delve into exactly why I believe this fight is something we should all get behind. The footage that emerged was Conor Benn working a heavy bag, and his trainer Tony Sims is overlooking it. We'll get to all of that in a moment. But first, for those of you that love a little troll out there, it was a little bit of a funny moment where Conor Benn seems to be throwing a combination, seems to miss the bag with the uppercut, throws the hook to the body, and then misses the uppercut. There's the hook to the body, there's the uppercut, and it misses. It caused a big laugh on Twitter for a lot of people. It reminded me a little bit of this clip. I'm not going to lie. This dude's trying to hit that punch bag that measures your punching power, misses it, hits the machine itself, and falls over. He's never living that down. And it reminded me a little bit of that, the way people were going on about Conor Benn missing. To be honest with you, I don't actually think he was trying to hit the bag. If I'm being honest with you, it's a heavy bag. It's a long, straight, traditional bag. He's throwing the uppercut as though it's part of a combination whereby he's chest to chest with somebody and he's very low, right up close to the body. So he's throwing it with the knuckles pointing up towards the ceiling, as though the chin is right there in front of his own face. So he's not going to angle the uppercut towards the bag. There are other bags which are better shaped to emulate this. For instance, this one here. Don't forget your jaw, your chin, the bottom of your chin, which is where you throw the uppercut in that situation, is not lined up with your chest. It's not a straight line. So you would be looking to basically land the uppercut in this sort of region here, if you want to sort of copy what the chin would be like. Now, of course, you don't always have to throw the uppercut underneath the chin. You could throw it to somebody's face if they're leaning forward. If they've got an overhanging part of their body, you can target the solar plexus. You can also angle an uppercut to go through the body as though you're throwing it through him, past him. That's almost like a shovel hook rather than a traditional uppercut towards the ceiling. But in that particular combination, I think Conor Benn was working on his form to set up the left hook following the uppercut. So I don't actually think that's the big deal that people were making it out to be, but it did make me laugh a little bit. Let's talk about what he does seem to be working on though. Initially you see him on the outside and there's a lot of upper body movement, a lot of head movement there. And then Tony Sims says something, and I think it's something along the lines of, that's it. And that seems to be a cue. And immediately Conor Benn steps in behind a double jab. And he doesn't really step out. He sort of, the bag is pushed backwards. He takes half a step out, but he's sort of still at sort of a long range, I guess you could say. Then he comes in again, and this time he stays up close. He's coming very, very low. He's more than happy to come in low, Conor Benn. We know he's got those big muscular thighs, and he'll shoot up from those. That's where he generates the power from those legs. And yeah, he'll step in behind that. So it looks like he's wanting to enter the pocket, coming in low, working the body, but then rather than fighting, say, an ambush style in the way someone like David Haye would do against, say, Nikolai Valuev, whereby he would jump in, land one or two big shots, then get out at an angle and reset and look to walk around the ring and then come back in again, Conor Benn actually seems to be staying in the pocket. So there's an initial raid, an initial ambush from the outside. You see the head movement there. Then once he comes in, he stays in. But one of the interesting things I wanted to show you is the actual double jab. I want you to watch the positioning of his right hand as he steps in. Okay? There. And again, there. The reason this seems to be significant to me is because one of the things that EUBANK likes to do is wait for you to lunge in, and then he likes to try and time you with a little sneaky left hand as you come in, whether it's a straight shot down the pipe or whether it's a little shovel hook. And what he seems to be doing here is protecting himself from that particular shot. He's got his elbow and his forearm protecting the sort of front side of his face and chin, and he's got his bicep and his shoulder protecting his jaw. He's stepping in almost expecting EUBANK to try and time him on the way in with that little sneaky shot. This is a sneaky shot that dropped Liam Williams and caused Williams a whole host of problems. Williams never really recovered from that. And this is something clearly to me that it looks like Conor Benn seems to be working on with Tony Sims, to enter the pocket, to force himself in basically, so that he's not in a position where he's eating a big shot entering, and then once he enters, he wants to stay low and let go of vicious combinations. Wide stance, low center of gravity, targeting that body. With Chris EUBANK Jr., we've already made the video about the potential dangers of rehydration and how difficult it would be for him, particularly if there was a rehydration clause. But even if there isn't, he'll be really pushing his body to make the weight. So clearly they're looking, in my opinion, to enter the pocket safely and responsibly, and then to start targeting the body. Now, we'll get into this in a lot more detail in the technical breakdown about some other things EUBANK does or can do to try and counteract this, and what Conor Benn could then do to try and counteract that attempted counteraction, right? That's what we're going to do, get really deep into it, but that's for another video. This was just a little taster, perhaps, of some of the things they're thinking about. But what I do want to talk to you about is this idea that Conor Benn is just too small, he's going to get obliterated, and that there's no point in really watching this fight. It's a gimmick. It's just, my dad's harder than your dad, and it's simple as that, and we're going to carry on the beef. I don't think it's that at all. Boxing history is filled with examples of welterweights that have stepped up to middleweight and have either been ultra competitive or won the fight. They've caused an upset and won the middleweight title. Now, bear in mind, in the past, the light middleweight division did not exist. And so as a result, this is the equivalent back then of jumping up one weight category rather than two. So while two appears to sound massive, this isn't something that can't be done. Let's look at some of those examples. One really famous one is Sugar Ray Leonard overcoming Marvelous Marvin Hagler in their 1987 super fight. It was indeed controversial. Marvin Hagler felt that he won with every ounce of his being. A lot of Marvin Hagler fans felt that he won the fight. A lot of Sugar Ray Leonard fans felt he won the fight. And there's a lot of people in the middle that feel that maybe Leonard got it, but that Hagler got the tactics wrong. And had he adjusted earlier in the fight, he would have won the fight, and they believe he would have won a rematch. The rematch never came, though. Hagler was desperate for the rematch. He was calling for the rematch consistently. But Sugar Ray Leonard had retired. It was actually the third time he'd retired, and he would go on to retire 5 times over the course of his career. But he had said before the fight that he would be retiring. And Marvin Hagler was desperately waiting around for him. The fight never came, and just over a year later, 14 months later, Hagler himself retired. And a month after that, Sugar Ray Leonard announced the comeback. He was either avoiding the rematch or he was just trolling Marvin Hagler. Who knows? He was fighting Donnie Leonard this time. But regardless, the fact of the matter was, Sugar Ray Leonard was the smaller man. And however you scored the fight, whether you had it to Hagler or Leonard, it was a very close fight. It was a very competitive fight. If this fight is half as good as that one, we're going to be very, very lucky customers. By the way, just to add a little additional note to that, Sugar Ray Leonard did eventually offer Hagler a rematch, and he would have apparently earned $15 million, but Hagler himself had declined. And the reason was because he'd gone to Italy. Italians will know Hagler very well. He became a big part of their sort of popular culture, to be honest with you, because he became an actor out there and he was much loved in Italy, was Marvin Hagler. And he'd retired by then, and he basically just said, listen, I've had enough. For a period of time, I wanted this guy so badly, but I've now moved on from that. And Sugar Ray Leonard actually split with Angelo Dundee as well, because Dundee, after this fight, basically didn't want to work with him anymore because he was furious. He got paid something like $150,000, which was just over 1% or 1.25% or something of Leonard's total purse. And obviously trainers tend to get 10%. Whether he was going to get 10% or not for such a big purse is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is he felt that 150,000 was just insulting. So Dundee left Leonard, and so there were so many changes in the sport around that time. But the fact of the matter is, like I said, this was a smaller guy going in against a legendary middleweight and able to overthrow him. And I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but Chris, no, you can't compare Conor Benn to Sugar Ray Leonard. This is true, but you also can't compare Chris EUBANK Jr. to Marvin Hagler. With all due respect to both fighters, I'm a fan of Conor Benn's, I'm a fan of Chris EUBANK's, their talents and so on and so forth. I like what they're capable of doing. I enjoy watching their fights. They're pay-per-view TV in terms of the entertainment they offer, right? But you're talking about two all-time greats here. So yes, I get it. Ben is not Leonard, but EUBANK is not Hagler. Another example is another legend of the sport, Roberto Duran, who was a natural lightweight and eventually grew into going up to bigger weight categories, but he was much smaller even when he was operating there. And he was able to dethrone Iran Barkley. And listen, don't let his record fool you. I know you might have a quick glance at Iran Barkley and see 19 losses and you think, this guy was no great shakes. He was a brilliant fighter. He was just coming off of a third round stoppage win over Thomas the Hitman Hearns. You're talking about a guy who had amateur pedigree. He was a bronze medalist at the Worlds in the amateurs in 1982. He, apart from being the WBC middleweight champion, he also then went on after this defeat to achieve some good things too. He became the IBF super middleweight titleist, and he also went on to become the WBA light heavyweight champion. So this is a guy who achieved big things and was in against some fantastic fighters as well. And it's a brilliant win for Roberto Duran, even though he was clearly the smaller man. There are other examples too that we can point to. For instance, the great Carlos Monzon, one of the best middleweights of all time. He is many people's pick for the best middleweight of all time. He fought Jose Napoles. Now, Napoles was a long reigning welterweight champion, a great fighter, and Monzon won the fight. However, the point is, this was one of Monzon's signature wins. That's a big name. That's a big tick on his resume. And Napoles was a natural welterweight. You see what I'm saying? So in the past, these sorts of fights were viewed differently. They weren't viewed in the way they are now. More recently, we had Miguel Cotto step up and fight Sergio Martinez and beat Martinez, who was a brilliant middleweight champion in his own right. Now, the truth is, if we're going to be fair here, because I'm not trying to spread propaganda, we got to be fair. Martinez had his knees strapped. His knees weren't the same at all. And Sergio was all about the movement, right? He was all about his ability to move around the ring, and he had a football career. He also did a lot of cycling as a youngster. So I say football career, he was more of a prospect and he decided to move over to boxing. So he relied a lot on those legs and that movement around the ring. So once he'd lost that, he was nowhere near as effective. So I'm not suggesting this was some sort of prime Martinez or anything like that, but he was nonetheless the middleweight champion. And Miguel Cotto stepped up and managed to get the job done. You also had Emil Griffith and Dick Tiger. This was another example of a welterweight stepping up to beat a middleweight and claim the world titles. Now, again, we're not here for the propaganda. I'm not here just trying to make a case and I'm going to lie to you or try to hoodwink you and pull the wool over your eyes or anything like that. So I'll be straight up honest. And Dick Tiger was the favourite to win the fight. And the decision to give it to Emil Griffith was actually booed by the crowd. 17 of 22 sports writers felt that Dick Tiger won the fight. Nonetheless, Emil Griffith did drop him, and it was the first time in Dick Tiger's career that he'd hit the canvas. 4 years later, they were to go on to have a rematch. And by this point, Dick Tiger had aged. He was 40 years old, and he looked a little bit slow by all accounts, and Emil Griffith won the fight easily. But the point is, whether you saw it as a victory for Dick Tiger or not, he was dropped. It was considered a close fight, although a clear result for most people for Dick Tiger. And in the rematch, Emil Griffith got the job done. And he was the smaller guy. Well, doesn't CONOR Benn have what seems to be outlandish power at welterweight? Regardless of what you think of his general skills and things like that, I know a lot of people feel that he's crude. You have to understand his dad Nigel was a little bit crude too. And yet he was very effective and beat some fantastic fighters. The point is, he has the power that clearly looks massive at welterweight. If we were to rewind to a day before the light middleweight division was introduced, well, then you're just talking about a guy that back in the day would have been going up one weight category and would have been considered a puncher. Can he land something on EUBANK? Can he drop EUBANK in the same way people weren't used to seeing Dick Tiger dropped? Maybe we're going to see something special happen with Chris EUBANK. Moving on from that, now Ray Robinson had been a welterweight, but by the time Sugar Ray had fought Carmen Basilio, he was a fully fledged and established middleweight. Carmen Basilio, on the other hand, was not. He had been a welterweight just 2 fights prior. He fought one fight, the sort of fight to acclimatise, I guess you could say, to middleweight, and then he fought Sugar Ray Robinson for the middleweight title, and he shocked Robinson. He beat him. And Carmen Basilio was not the sort of fighter who was a back foot guy and he's avoiding having to trade. This was an iron-chinned pressure fighter that came and brought it to Sugar Ray. It was actually considered the Ring Magazine Fight of the Year in 1957. The referee actually scored the fight to Ray Robinson, but the two judges scored the fight to Carmen Basilio, and the majority of the sports writers present also had the fight to Carmen Basilio. They then had a rematch, and in 1958, this time it was via split decision in favour of Sugar Ray Robinson. And again, in 1958, this was the Ring Magazine Fight of the Year. So you're talking about a welterweight going in against a guy who by now had been a fully fledged middleweight, who is considered by many to be the best fighter of all time. For the record, Carmen Basilio actually came in lighter in the second fight, 153 pounds, than he did in the first fight. He came in against a guy considered by many to be the best fighter of all time, and both fights were split decisions. Both fights were Ring Magazine Fight of the Years. So don't necessarily assume that a weight difference between welterweight and middleweight automatically means that a guy is outmatched and outsized. Another example more recently of a fantastic fight is Kell Brook and Gennady Golovkin. Yes, I know there's the narrative out there that Kell Brook was just having a little bit of success and Golovkin was always going to break him down. But the reason I'm bringing this up is not so much the outcome of the fight or whether you think it was a real tough test for Golovkin or not. I want to show you the difference, though, in the way people view the more modern day. Golovkin is not given credit for this victory, even though Kell Brook was a fantastic welterweight, and at this stage of his career, many people considered him to be the best welterweight in the world. Paulie Malignaggi himself, for instance, who's a fantastic analyst, said that he felt that Kell Brook was a special fighter and probably the best welterweight in the world. So when he went up to fight Gennady Golovkin and Golovkin got the job done and Kell gave a good account of himself in a round or two, Golovkin didn't get the credit that some of these other great fighters of the past did for also beating fantastic welterweights. In other words, it's a very modern concept to start undermining these sorts of fights. Now, that's not to say that size doesn't matter. Of course it does. And I'm not sitting here trying to undermine the concept of size mattering. More recently, you saw Ryan Garcia against Javier Fortuna, for instance, in the lightweight category. Now, Fortuna is at least a weight division or two weight divisions smaller if you're talking about natural size. In this particular scenario, I was not shocked at all that Ryan Garcia brutalized him, destroyed him. But the reason this is different to EUBANK and Benn is because Javier Fortuna did not have any physical advantages. Think about it. Ryan Garcia is bigger. He's faster. He hits harder. He's more youthful. And he's also the cash cow. He's got the judges on his side. What could Fortuna possibly do to upset Ryan Garcia? So in that sort of scenario, I understand. Size matters and there's no real interest. But we've already spoken about the explosive power of CONOR Benn. He seems to have a fantastic engine. So does Chris EUBANK, that's for sure. But if EUBANK's struggling to make the weight a little bit, and we know that CONOR Benn can bang. We know he's got heart. He's going to keep coming. If he hits the deck, he's going to get up and keep coming. Even as a youngster, he showed that in those tough fights against Peno. Now, the fighter back then, the CONOR Benn back then, compared to the CONOR Benn now, completely different. Night and day. This CONOR Benn is a much better fighter than that one. Point is, he's dangerous. It's not a Garcia Fortuna type of scenario here. When we get closer to the fight, I will be doing a very detailed technical breakdown and coming up with an official prediction as to how I think the fight will go. I hope by now I've presented enough of an argument to show you why I'm excited about this and why I think we should all get behind the fight. There's one thing you have to understand. The great sporting events, in a way, are dramas. It's not just about the competitive nature inside the ring. Of course, we need to see great fights, but the narrative also plays a role in creating the scene. It plays a role in creating the drama. Think about a really good movie, whether it's a movie based on war, I don't know, Troy or The Gladiator, or a really good Western or something like that. It's not just the sword fight or the shootout at the end that makes you think, wow, this is brilliant. It's the build-up. It's the story. You're talking about two fantastic characters and legends of British boxing, and their blood feud, their family vendetta continues, and they're passing that on to their sons, and their sons will want to see it out for their fathers. What a story this is. I can't wait for it. Benn versus EUBANK Jr. I hope you guys are able to enjoy the blood feud, the family vendetta, and see it settled. Let me know what you think. Have I managed to change your mind even slightly? Or maybe you were always on the train like I am. Chat to you soon. Thank you for watching. Take care and God bless. And please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe button and notifications button.